You've been told that spirituality will always eventually bring peace, but no one ever tells you about the shadows that come from the light. My name is Peter Abundant, aka Dr. Abundant, PhD and ordained minister of metaphysical sciences, the study of spirituality. I am also the author of The Enlightened Shadow and Spiritual Not Religious, both available on Amazon and Audible. When you traverse this spiritual journey, you are doing so with the understanding that while you are on the journey, and once you quote unquote reach that final destination of the journey, you will in fact experience enlightenment, bliss, joy, fulfillment. You'll learn to materialize and manifest all the things that you desire. But what we rarely talk about is the dark aspects of spirituality. Now, that seems to be counterintuitive. It seems to be contradictive. Spirituality, right, as we know it, is supposed to represent the light. We take this journey of spirituality to actually avoid or get rid of or figure out the dark side, right? The dark aspects of life and being a spiritual being in this human experience, right? On this earthly plane, this physical reality. So why do we need to talk about, or why even does there exists within spirituality darkness? Well, because that's also part of the journey. When we take on this journey of spirituality, we are taking on the spiritual of we're taking on the journey of enlightenment. We're taking on the journey of exposing, not only exposing the greatness, the divinity that is within you, but recognizing that in order to expose that divinity, you have to expose other aspects, the darkness, the ego, the trauma, loneliness, isolation, things of that nature. So you always have to recognize that the universe is a constant fluctuation of light and dark, of contrasts. Because when we recognize that the oneness that we all conceptually understand, as we go into really recognizing, living that, being that oneness, we have to recognize that in order to acknowledge that oneness, you must take the path of duality. You see, it's part of the journey. And so when we take this journey of spirituality, you have to recognize particular things that are going to come up along this journey. One of those things is recognizing that awakening doesn't always mean beauty. Okay? You start seeing the truth of things. Now, the truth often is hard, right? It is intense. It is something that we often want to resist because it shakes you up. It really shakes up your reality. It shakes up your perspective of things as you once knew it. So it'll really change how you see things, even change how you identify, what you identify with. So you have to understand the spiritual journey often begins with confusion. It begins with pain. It begins with the discomfort of disconnecting with your old self, right? That false self. And though the idea of disconnecting from that false self seems beautiful, and it is in the beginning especially very uncomfortable, and it can be very ugly. So you have to recognize that. You have to own the fact that, okay, before you experience the beauty, or as you are on the journey of experiencing the beauty, you're going to also experience some darkness, some ugliness. Okay. Now, when you understand that the ugliness is part of the beauty, then that's when you start to actually shift. But in the beginning, you may not be able to recognize that. Okay. The next thing is isolation, loneliness. That often is part of the spiritual journey. I myself deal with that on an ongoing basis. You deal with even the simple fact that you are at this level of consciousness can be a very isolating experience because as you go about and exchange with others, you find that not many people are at the same level of consciousness. They're not having these conversations. And so you can often feel alone. And then when you try to find your tribe, your group of people, sometimes you can connect with identifying with spirituality, but how you move through the reality, through this plane of existence, how you vibrate may be different than that. A lot of people on the spiritual journey are people who are experiencing the ugliness still. So they are angry, right? They're looking at things from a very limited lack mentality. But you may be at a space where you are transcending that lack mentality, transcending the conspiracies and this idea that people or things or entities are out to get you, right? Which you may have been. You may have been at that place of understanding, but now you have ascended beyond that. And so that can leave you in a space of not feeling connected. You're not feeling like you have a bond or connection with others. You don't have a community. That is part of the journey as well. Okay. As you grow, you feel separated from your friends, from your family, right? From the world you once knew. And now you have to really get into creating a new world, connecting with new friends, even creating new family. So that's part of the journey. But you have to understand that the isolation is really temporary. The isolation is also an illusion. Because when you are taking this journey, you recognize that the isolation is just a part of the ego. The ego is making itself clear or communicating to you that it is coming from a place of fear, right? Because now the ego has to be uncomfortable. It has to change. It has to adapt. It has to step away from that old self and recognize that truly there is no isolation, right? Because we're all one. And truly there is no separation from friends and family because friends, families, even strangers are a reflection of you. So when you recognize that, that becomes a powerful transformative shift that takes place for you. Another thing is a dark aspect of the spiritual journey is really facing your demons, facing the trauma, facing the patterns, the bad aspects of yourself, right? That you may consider bad aspects. Shadow, right? Shadow work is where this comes into play, where you address and acknowledge those aspects of yourself. But instead of avoiding them, getting rid of them, trying to act like they don't exist, you confront them, you address them, you take ownership of them, you transform them, you reframe them. You see, true spirituality forces you to face those parts of yourself that you simply try to avoid. That is where lots of the transformation takes place. Shadow work, trauma, dealing with unhealed wounds, they will rise up to the surface. And you will feel discomfort. You will feel even shame and guilt because you're on this conscious spiritual journey, but yet you're feeling the effects of the trauma of these unhealed wounds. And so you have to take a look at those things because they're coming up because you are awakening, because you are on this journey, because your consciousness needs to push those things out. You need to deal with them in order for you to actually be and exist as your true self on this plane. Ego, that's a big part of this journey. Escaping the ego, okay, is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to do. Even people who appear to be the most spiritual are often not dealing with their ego in a productive way. They are often being led by the ego. You see, the ego is always there. So you always have to manage that ego. But you have to recognize that you have to address that the ego has a role, right? It has a purpose. But if you're not constantly aware of the ego and how it shows up in every moment, from moment to moment, then what's going to happen is it's going to basically, it's going to sneak into aspects of your life and manipulate and move in ways that will cause you to act from fear. And that may show up as arrogance. It may show up as, judgment, shame of others. It may show up as you trying to judge others and really belittle others. Okay. It may show up as you putting yourself up higher on a pedestal above others. So you have to be mindful about that. And you have to recognize that others, whether it be individuals, places, things, they are reflections of you. So if you look at others or you look at this thing and you are disgusted by the other, you don't want to deal with the thing, that is a reflection of what's going on within you. Okay. So you must start thinking more about awakening to the oneness of all things and how you relate to that oneness. Okay. How you relate to other people. So you have to really acknowledge the ego instead of getting rid of the ego. A lot of people on the spiritual journey want to kill the ego. They talk about the ego death, but really you cannot kill the ego, especially in this physical form, on this physical plane of existence. But what you can do is manage it. Recognize that the ego is a part of this game of life that we're playing. I often compare it to, if you're playing basketball, you need a ball, right? Well, the ego is that ball in the game of life that we're playing. And so you just simply have to practice. You simply have to figure out how to move with that thing in order for you to play the game effectively. Okay. The last thing is recognizing the trap of spiritual bypassing, right? So what does that mean? That means you'll be tempted to ignore pain by masking it with positivity. Many people on the spiritual journey they deal with this, they face this, and it is difficult because we assume, again, that spirituality is about being happy all the time, being perfect, having this facade, having this appearance. Even people who know you to be conscious of your spiritual journey will throw that in your face when you don't show up in a particular way. Oh, you're somebody who's spiritual, but yet you do this, you do that, you do this. And so you have to recognize that spirituality is not about perfection, especially somebody else's idea of perfection. It is about unfoldment. It is about enlightenment. It is about exposing, recognizing, growing, expanding. Okay. So, but healing only comes when you go through things and recognize it. It doesn't come when you avoid things and try to mask it with a smile. So you have to recognize that positivity is great. It is the final product of this journey. But you have to understand that you are still living a human experience. You still are human. You still are going to fluctuate with certain emotions, certain feelings, certain thoughts, certain patterns. And so do not fall into that trap of bypassing the true, authentic experience just because you wish to appear perfect. You wish to appear somebody who's always positive. So you have to understand that it's okay to embrace feelings like sadness, feelings like melancholy, right? Sometimes even feelings of anger. It's all about what you do with those feelings, though, with those emotions. It's okay to recognize that you have a bad pattern of looking at people with a bias or a prejudice. As long as you recognize it, you own it, is again a matter of what you do with that recognition, what you do with that self-awareness. These are the things that are going to come up This is the dark side of spirituality, the things that you have to address in order for you to take this journey more effectively, maybe even faster. Because when you avoid these things, it's going to slow down your process and it's going to make the process even more uncomfortable. So I want this process to be simple, enjoyable, pleasurable. I want it to be effective, enlightening. And so this is why I support you in sharing these dark aspects that will show up along this journey of light, of love, of beauty, of understanding you. Thank you so much. Feel free to go to drabundant.com, subscribe to my daily newsletter, and get access to this free ebook, The Power Within, and so much more. Continue to join me on this journey. Peace and abundance always.